Hey everybody, how's it going? We're back into MTG books. This is chapter 10, which means after this, there's only 7 more chapters. So we're getting close to the end of this whole book. And then hopefully by the time. Eldraine is. Throne of Eldraine, the set, is coming out on MTG Arena this week? I think it's today even, or maybe tomorrow. Not really sure. I think it's coming out this week, this weekend. Um, Although officially it launches somewhere October 4, I think, or 8, something like that. Anyway, hopefully by then, before the first week of, or at least before the second week, or maybe before the end of October, rather. That is our goal. We will have finished Eldraine, the Wildered quest, and then we can move on to another gaming book. I still don't know what to do. I might, start a poll and just ask you guys what book you want me to do. Anyway, let's get into it. In the pre-dawn twilight, Will, Rowan, and the other 4 waited impatiently at the henge portal. Will was starting to get worried. What if they missed their chance? How would they find the stag? "Is King Yovo coming?" he whispered. Elwyn was leaning against the gate, head pressed to the ironclad planks. "I think he's already inside. The portal is awake and open. That's odd. Very odd. Ear-pricklingly odd." A scintillating aurora of lights played against the sky, then faded. A rumbling, grinding noise sounded from the other side of the gate. After it ceased, heavy footfalls approached. They retreated hastily as the gate swung outward. King Yorvo stood like a massive stone menhir looming against the dark sky. "I've already moved the stones in the alignment you requested," he said. Elwyn opened her mouth to ask a question, but when the giant looked directly at her with a disapproving stare, she closed her lips and heaved a disgruntled sigh. He added, "We don't have much time. Hurry." The portal was at the center of the great henge, a rough circle of stones with a larger standing stone in the middle, wrapped by the roots and branches of an ancient yew tree. The sun was already rising over the eastern hills. Within the pattern of its light, the shadows of the henge stones touched the portal stone in a distinct pattern. "You're sure this will bring us close to the obelisks?" Rowan asked in her usual blunt way. "Why would you doubt me?" Elwyn looked astonished. "I have spent more years wandering in the wilds than you have been alive, young Rowan. And even I, the most knowledgeable of lore mages. I hope you know what you're doing," Rowan added. Elwyn laughed. "Don't be absurd." Green magic crawled down the face of the central gnomon and spun into a circle. As the light intensified, the stones circumscribed by the circular glim dissolved to become a pathway. What lay beyond Will could not perceive, only a glare so bright it hid the land they must walk into. "The portal will remain open until dusk today," said King Yorvo. "In a year and a day, it will open again, from dawn to dusk. After that," he sighed, "after that, you will be considered lost forever." The 4 friends looked at each other. Will could never have considered himself a coward, would have despised himself for the feeling. Yet he hesitated. Even Rowan and Cerise hesitated. Once through, they would walk straight into the deepest tangle of the wilds, where the boldest and most experienced knights might meet a brutal death. They had only the brief hours of midwinter daylight to find the stag before their path back to Garenbrink and the safety of the realm would close for an entire year. Titus called, "Our time is now, friends!" He cast his net of heartening magic over the others, banishing doubt, then rode fearlessly through the shining portal without looking back. He and his horse sparkled until they became incandescent, and, in a flare of shocking brightness, passed out of sight. "You were supposed to go first," Elwyn shouted at Cato. "Go on, old man!" Cato urged Hale forward, the griffin squawking as he leaped through the portal. Elwyn and Cerise followed, leaving Rowan and Will to bring up the rear. Will raised a hand to shade his eyes, but the glare became so painful he had to shut them. A change of pressure popped in his ears. The harder clop of his mount's hooves on the packed dirt of the henge turned to the sinking thud of damp ground. A breeze brushed his face, heavy with the soporific scent of flowers. He opened his eyes to darkness untouched by stars or moon, a drowsy blanket of night steeped with humid air. Close at hand, he heard the calming burble of a river. Where was this place? It didn't feel like winter. Had Elwyn or Yorvo lied to them? Were they in on the plot against the High King? Trembling, he drew his sword, but could see nothing. If he couldn't see, he couldn't fight. "There!" cried Titus from somewhere ahead. A light winked to the right, illuminating an artificial mound wreathed in vines that were covered in white flowers easily visible in the darkness because of their coruscating aura. Twin obelisks stood side by side at the mound's top. A murky blue light traced the outlines of sigils carved into the pillars. More lights flared, revealing the ring of lanterns floating in a circle around the obelisks. Each lantern was shaped as a larger version of the vine flowers, petals burning with white fire. A horse and rider lurched into view at the farthest edge of the light's aura, their features too shadowed to make out. "Wait!" Cato's voice came from far to the left, nowhere near Titus, as if the party had been scattered by their passage through the portal. "Cerise! Elwyn! Rowan!" "I'm here," answered Will. "Titus, wait for us!" A bulb of yellow light popped into view to his left, illuminating the lore mage as she peered around, discovering the two girls close by her. The bulb expanded until it shone like a full moon over the scene. Will found himself at the edge of the clearing he'd seen in his vision. At their backs rose a wall of tangled forest, and the gleam of portal half hidden on the verge, its shape and light so faint he might easily have mistaken it for a magically shimmering spider's web suspended in midair. Ahead rose the mound, and beyond it lay a river. Titus rode toward the mound and its twin obelisks. "There's something moving in the trees." "Stop bellowing, you fool," said Elwyn. "Shouting attracts predators." Cato yelled, "Titus, beware!" His next words were drowned out by the thundering rustle of a large creature rushing through the forest. A horse-sized drake burst out of the trees as if launched by a crossbow. It snatched Titus off the back of his mount. A talon on each shoulder, Titus shouted, struggling to shake free as the beast's leathery wings boomed, beating skyward. Hale flapped into the air, Cato astride. An arrow loosed by Cerise bounced off the drake's scaly back. Hale flew above it, then plummeted to slash at the drake's eyes, while Cato thrust his spear at its vulnerable throat. The conjoined attack was too much for the drake. With a roar, it released Titus and dove for the safety of the nearest trees. Titus hit the dirt, rolled, and came up in a kneeling position, braced on a hand as he shook off the shock of the drop. The others converged on him. Will leaped down from his horse and helped his friend to his feet. Both he and Titus could barely catch their breaths, pulses pounding in their ears and bodies shaking with adrenaline. The mage light faded, returning the clearing to a murky twilight, although Will could now see the outlines of the surrounding trees. "Welcome to the wilds," said Elwyn. "That was good teamwork for a cohort of novices. Though it wouldn't have gone so well without Hale." Rowan wiped her brow. "What was that thing?" she demanded. "A drake," said Cerise, "just like the ones drawn in our school books." "No, I mean the shadow I saw over by the mound. It looked like a horse, and a rider." "I saw it too," said Will, peering nervously in that direction. "But it's gone now." "I saw nothing," said Elwyn. Hale landed with a thump, startling the horses. "Are you all well?" Cato asked. "Titus, are you injured?" "I'm fine," Titus said with a snap of annoyance, or perhaps embarrassment, as having been taken by surprise. "Why are we here at night?" "The portal sent us west. It's not yet dawn here." Elwyn indicated the eastern sky slowly lightening to the rosy gray of pre-dawn. "The two possibilities we discussed on our journey." "At length," muttered Rowan, "still seem most likely to me. Either the High King or his remains are hidden somewhere near these obelisks." "Remains," said Cato with a frown. "Is such language necessary in front of the children?" "We are not children! Oh, naive!" snapped Rowan, and Will was glad she jumped in so fast. Elwyn nodded. "The girl is right, Cato. This isn't a picnic. We shouldn't pretend everything will be fine when the High King may already be dead." The words hurt to hear, but Will knew they couldn't hide from the ugly truth. "Let's stick to what we know," he said. "How do we find the stag?" "The vision showed you the stag at the base of the mound, with the sun rising between the obelisks. As long as we are here in this clearing, when the sun rises, the stag will come to us." "How can you know today is the correct sunrise?" Will asked. "Did I not explain this already? This specific pair of obelisks is sited precisely so the midwinter sunrises shines exactly between them. The obelisks mark the border of the heart realm of the wilds, the old crown city of the lost elven dominion. There are 3 other pyramids like this one, each with a pair of obelisks on top, each pair hewn from different substance. Winter's obelisks are carved from bone. The other 3 pairs mark the sun's rising at midsummer and at the vernal and autumnal equinoxes." Will stared at her, mouth agape. "You really do know so much. And so might you, young man, if you apply yourself and seek a knighthood at Vantras, as all the best people do." Cato coughed. She smirked as she turned to him. "I doubt even you, Cato, have stood upon the shore of the river that encircles the heart realm of the wilds. Few humans have seen it, and fewer still live to report that they've seen it. Yet here we are." "As you say, fewer still live to report that they've seen it, so I'll get back to sentry duty," Cato said. Hale leaped skyward in a flurry of wings. The pair nestled into a slow circling of the clearing. "The sun moves slowly at the solstices," Elwyn said. "Since we are here and waiting for sunrise, you young ones have an unparalleled chance to catch a glimpse of the ancient glory and extraordinary mysteries that dwell here at the heart of the wilds. It will be something for you to brag of, should any of you live to grow old and boastful." "Look!" She cast another bulb of light. Propelled by her magic, the bright sphere drifted past the mound and illuminated the bank of the river. A pair of bridges stood side by side, one carved of jade and another of obsidian. They arced over the water toward a gloomy shore impossible to make out, obscured by a denser shroud than twilight. "You can't see the Heart Realm until you cross," said Elwyn wistfully, "but you can inhale the enchantment of its charm-drenched flowers." The air did indeed smell heady with blossoms, whose scents made Will dizzy. A breeze tickled his ears, as with the breath of invisible sprites teasing him with their chortling whispers. His hair stirred as if raked by tiny claws. Will flapped his hands on either side of his head, and the noise quieted. "Why is it warm? Like summer?" he asked. "Why isn't there snow here?" "The seasons in the wilds do not follow the reliable pattern of our own. They shift as changeably as an elf queen's whim, but the sun's rising remains constant. Thus, the obelisks. Do you see that flame? The flame, barely more than a flicker, floated in the darkness of the opposite shore. It was either a small flame not far away, or a huge bonfire many leagues distant. Elwyn went on. "The fire burns at the tip of the wing of a petrified dragon, whose stone corpse was carved eons ago into an amphitheater. That's where the great council meet in days of yore. It's said the elves recognize neither king nor queen, but, like the assembly in Embereth, argued over everything until they came to agreement. Long-lived as they are, I suppose it wouldn't have mattered to them if it took years to reach consensus. It's rumored a council still meets, but I've never seen it for myself, so I can't be sure." "I thought you'd seen everything," said Rowan, and this time Will heard no sarcasms or jest in her tone. "I have walked in the empty amphitheater and marveled at the old city's fallen spires and the delicate bones of its architecture. I have listened to a tune plucked from the ensorcelled strings of an elven lute. I have tasted spring water from the well of ghosts, and suffered through a gale midway across the span of the Bridge of Regrets. But of all the perilous places in the wilds, the borders of the Heart Realm are most perilous of all. The elves are usually indifferent to the likes of me, because I am not here to fight, but to learn. But that doesn't mean they want lore mages tramping about their precious sanctuaries. Dangerous creatures often come to drink from the river's magical waters." She touched the scar at her throat. With narrowed eyes, she scanned the tree and sky, but it was still too dark to see anything except the barest outlines of the landscape. "Why are there bridges?" Will asked. "Wouldn't one be enough?" Rowan added. "The obsidian bridge is so beautiful." Elwyn clucked disapprovingly. "Don't they teach you kids anything? Never, ever cross an obsidian bridge in the wilds." "Why not?" A shrill whistle from the overhead broke the twilight hush. "Danger!" Elwyn swung her head around as her mage light floated away across the water, leaving their surroundings dimmer than they had been a moment before. Will pulled ice into his hands, scanning for a target. How had it gotten so much darker all of a sudden, as if darkness were washing in on a tide of unsavory magic? Beside him, he felt the prickling of Rowan's lightning waiting to be released. "Over there!" Titus urged his horse toward the trees, taking the lead as always. A shadowy horse and rider lurched toward the young knight out of the murky twilight. A spear thrust caught Titus's horse, a glancing blow across the flank, sending the animal stumbling. Titus flung a leg over the saddle and slid to the ground before he could get thrown. Drawing his sword, he turned to face the enemy. A stench boiled through the air. The fading remnants of Elwyn's light revealed the creature's true nature. It was a lich knight, all bone and decaying sinew, the undead remains of a brave fighter from the realm who had met death in the heart of the wilds. Its dead mount wore full plate armor darkened with rust and smeared with the dried blood of untold opponents. As the creature closed with Titus, it raised its sword to cleave the youth. "Titus! Duck!" Will threw a mantle of ice onto the Lich Knight to slow it down. Rowan galloped up from behind, slashing her sword across the undead knight's back. Lightning released from the sword, shot through its frame, catching fire on scraps of cloth before it fizzled out. But the creature wasn't staggered at all. Its sword slammed down on Titus. He pitched backward, heels overhead, the sword cutting air where he'd just been. As he rolled to his feet, he drew his sword to catch the Lich Knight's next cut on his blade. His entire body shook from the weight of the blow, but he held it off. Cerese's arrow punched through the skeletal creature, tearing flesh and chipping bone, but the impact did nothing to deter it from pressing Titus back. Hail swooped, talons clutching at the Lich Knight's head, but all that came away were the jagged remains of an ancient helm, revealing a face of bone and rotting flesh. An eddy of black nothingness filled its eyes and gaping jaw. Again, Will and Rowan cast their ice and lightning, but the magic coursed over it without effect. It marched relentlessly forward as Titus scrambled to stay out of its reach. Elwyn threw a globe of blue light toward the creature. The sphere pushed its way inside the shredded tabard and popped with a burst of blue fireworks. The Lich Knight jerked to a halt, swaying as the tiny explosions rattled inside its armor. Overhead, hail swept a turd above the trees, trying to get an angle from which to attack. Titus swung up onto his horse. Though bleeding from a gash scored across his flank, his mount was able and eager to run. "Move! Move! Where to, Elwyn? Back through the portal?" "We can't leave before sunrise," shouted Will. "I'd rather die than return to Garenbrig like frightened rabbits," Rowan cried. "To the Jade Bridge!" Elwyn called. "A Lich Knight cannot cross moving water." In the brief course of the battle, strands of daylight had woven into the darkness. The petals of the floating lanterns folded together in the manner of night flowers closing up as the sun rises. On the mound, the white flowers blooming within the vines began to close as light touched them. At the base of the obelisks, a tangle of vines was heaped up over the contours of a large four-legged body. What Will took first for the woody stalks of a dead bush stuck up from one end of the concealed body, two curving racks that mirrored each other, like antlers. Antlers? A stag covered in flowers imbued with magical sleep? That was all Will had time to think as he raced with the others past the mound and toward the bridges of the river's shore. Elwyn called, "Don't go on the obsidian bridge! The Jade Bridge is the safe bridge." Although Titus was in the lead, he pulled up at the river's bank, waving the others past him. Elwyn rode swiftly out onto the Jade Bridge, with Cerese and Rowan close behind. "Will! Titus! Hurry!" Rowan yelled back at them. "Go!" Titus said as Will came up beside him. "I'll bring up the rear." The Lich Knight jolted after them, but the creature was too far away to reach them before they would all cross to safety. It would be all right. It will be all right. With the words ringing in his head, Will started up the bridge. They just had to shake off the Lich Knight, and then they could turn right around. Had he really seen a stag buried beneath flowers? Would it wake when the sun's light touched it? Behind him, Titus shouted, garbled words. "Titus!" Ahead of Will, Rowan dragged her horse to a halt. Will swung around in the saddle. 5 paces from the bridge, Titus had come to a halt, hands clasped over his ears in a vain attempt to block a sound Will could not hear. Titus's mouth came open in a choked, rattling scream as his gaze tracked upward. Above him, outlined by the rosy light of the rising sun, a hooded and robed figure flew over the trees. The figure rode on a creature that bore something of the shape of a dragon, but had the thin legs of an insect, a profusion of crooked horns in a cluster, where his eyes should have been. It was a specter, one of the most feared creatures of the wilds, because specters only appear to people who are already doomed. Too late, Will realized he'd frozen as if spelled by his own ice. His horse was fighting the reins, trying to follow Rowan, Cerese, and Elwyn, who had ridden part way across the bridge. He dismounted and ran back toward the clearing, shouting for Rowan to leave her horse too and come after him. The Lich Knight was still too far away from Titus to strike a blow with its blade, but the mist of its magic billowed up from the earth. Immaterial vines twined around Titus's horse's legs, caught on his friend's boots, and spun a rope of magic around his body so quickly that between one breath and the next, the mist completely obscured Titus and his mount. "Stop! Don't leave the bridge!" shouted Elwyn from where she'd halted beside Ceres on the Jade Bridge, safe above the moving water. "The mist is deadly! It's the Lich Knight's magic!" From behind, Rowan grabbed his arm and yanked him to a halt. "It's too late!" Together they stared in disbelief and horror. The mist unwound from its prey as a cocoon dissolves. Titus and his horse were still upright as they came back into view, but when the tendrils loosed their hold and sank into the soil, youth and mare collapsed in a heap. Will had to get Titus, pull him to safety. When he set a foot on the cold, damp earth, a chilly sensation pressed into his flesh. A thread of mist curled around his boot, winding up his leg as it leached warmth, energy, and life from his flesh. Rowan's hand on his arm was hot. She dragged him backward, back onto the bridge. Where the tendril of mist touched the Jade Bridge, it withered, leaving Will free of its taint. The Lich Knight halted on arm's length from the bridge. A staggering chill emanated from its body. The void of its gaze opened to a pit of despair. "Share his fate. Come to me." Will took a step toward the knight. Rowan pulled on him, trying to drag him back. "Will! Well! Death is peace. Come to me." He took another step down, hauling Rowan after him, because she wouldn't let go. A third step placed his boot on earth, not jade. Eager tendrils of mist sprouted from the ground to wrap around his leg. The Lich Knight's bony jaw opened wide. A miasma of stink and cold and desolation poured over Will, rooting him to the ground, so tired, so very tired. The world around him began to fade into a gloomy, hopeless haze. Movement flashed. A magnificent stag charged into view, head lowered, and slammed into the Lich Knight and its mount. With a powerful twist of its antlers, it flung the Lich Knight to the ground, and then, bellowing, it trampled back and forth on the corpse, splintering it into pieces. Released from the Lich Knight's mesmerizing magic, Will sprang forward, followed by Rowan. They hacked at the remains of the Lich Knight until none of it could have pieced itself back together, no matter how powerful its magic. At first, Will thought the gasping noise Rowan was making was panting, but she was crying with fury and grief. She kept hacking and hacking, long after they had done enough, chopping into the dirt until finally Will tightened a glove of ice over her hand, dropping her sword. She staggered backward, fell to her knees next to Titus, and burst into tears. Ceres arrived on Sophus. She dismounted in haste, knelt beside Titus, and pressed a hand to his chest. Titus's eyes were open, staring vacantly at leaves and sky. The blue of his eyes faded to a foggy white. A sickly sheen made his skin glisten, and its oily texture began to blister and bubble on his skin. "Fool boy," said Elwyn behind him in a sorrowful voice. "Less courage and more knowledge. That's what would have aided you. Stand back, Ceres. Let me burn the remains." But I can heal him. I can," cried Ceres. "He is beyond your help, girl. See how he already begins to transform. If we do not burn him, he will arise as a lich in his turn. Stand back." The fireworks Elwyn set on Titus, his dead horse, and the scattered pieces of Lich Knight corpse caught and blazed. Ceres scrambled away from the heat. Rowan rose. "It happened so fast," she said, gulping down sobs. Will helped Ceres to her feet. The healer was crying now too, hands pressed to her face. They stared with disbelief and shock at the ashes and scorched debris, all that was left of the dear friend they'd grown up with, the leader of their little band. How could Titus be dead? The horses wandered down off the bridge, even though Will knew they were simply following Sophus. Their presence comforted him, as if they mourned Titus also. And maybe they did. Titus had always been good with horses, and they trusted him. Hail landed in the clearing. Cato ran over, his hand pressed to his heart, and his expression creased with grief and dismay. "I warned you, the wilds is no place for rash, cocky youth," said Elwyn in a grating voice that made Will want to scream at her. With her staff, she poked through the debris and uncovered Titus's sword, the only object her fireworks hadn't warped and burned. "I'll give the boy this. He showed loyalty in placing himself at the rear so the rest of us could reach the bridge." In a choked voice, Will said, "If only I had—" "Will, enough!" Cato broke in. "No matter what Elwyn says, there's not a thing any of us could have done once the spectre materialized. Titus is not the first to lose his life in the wilds, nor will he be the last." He grimly dragged the sword from the remains of the young man, his horse, and the Lich Knight that had killed them both with its life-sucking magic. The sword's sheath was blackened and useless, so he slung the tarnished weapon across his back. "We'll return the blade to his family when our quest is finished," he said, then lifted his gaze to the stag. The noble beast had retreated to the river's bank and paused there, looking their way. "Cerise, you have the halter?" Cerise wiped the tears from her face as she straightened. "I'm ready," she said with a hot glance at the lore mage. "Sophus will help me calm it, if you're sure we're meant to capture it." Rowan picked up her sword with shaking hands. "What else can we do? The mirror said the stag will lead us to our father." "Is that exactly what Indrelon said?" Elwyn asked. "One must be precise." Rowan bit her lip rather than snap at the woman, but Will wasn't so tongue-tied. "Find the stag, and you will find your father. Or did you not believe me the first 20 times I repeated it to you?" He replied in his frostiest manner. His eyes were red with tears, and he wanted to bash in the heads of 100 Lich Knights to get revenge. "Before the Lich Knight attacked, I saw the stag asleep in the white flowers at the base of the obelisks." "Bespelled," said Elwyn portentously. "Woken by the midwinter sunrise. I don't think this at all. Either someone planted the stag there to lure us here, or the stag was imprisoned within the sleeping flowers for another purpose. Or maybe our father is asleep in the flowers, and we should search for him there." A loud whistle-like command sounded from the opposite shore of the river. The stag tossed its head as if in anger. It bolted past them and ran onto the obsidian bridge. Part way up the span, it paused to look back. With a weird, uncanny instinct, Will was sure it wanted to return, that it didn't want to cross the bridge at all. The whistle reverberated again. Again the stag tossed its head, antlers cutting the air as if trying to shake off on an invisible leash. When the whistle shrilled a third time, it loped across the obsidian bridge and out of their sight.